Good morning, everyone. This panel is going to be in English because of the profile of our speakers. Good morning, everyone. My name is Javier Sobrino, and I'm going to act as a moderator today with great experts in the industry. The title of the panel is The Future of Sport Investments. So basically what we are going to cover is the relationship between investments and sports industry. So let me very briefly introduce our panelists today, very brief, because what I want to is leave the floor for them to speak. And by the way, we are going to try to make this panel as interactive and flexible. We don't need to agree with everyone every time. So we can create here some new points and insights for you guys, for the audience, to explore new possibilities for the future of investments in sport. So very briefly, Luis Vicente, thank you for being here. Apex chairman, great experience in the sports industry, among others, Valencia FC, Manchester United, Manchester City, sorry about that, FIFA, and many other sport entities in the intersection between commercial investments and business development. Jochen Losch, hope I pronounced the name the right way, founder and CEO of GL Sport Investments, boutique in investments in the sports industry, and actually one of the key voices in order to share experiences on this regard. Jeff Luno, an expert, by the way, an expert in sport data, which is something that is very relevant for the future of our industry. Now, obviously, very well known in Spain because being the founder and the owner of the group that owns Blue Crowd, the founder that owns Leganés, together with Cancun FC and a club in Czech Republic and Dubai. So something that we will cover as well in the session will be MCOs and the impact of MCOs in the industry. And finally, Mario Malavé, who is is partner in Mercury 13, investment fund specialized in investing in women's sport properties, mainly football. So very quickly, we're going to structure the panel in three main parts. The first one is going to be talking about private equity and sport. The second part of the panel will be related specifically to MCOs. And finally, obviously, I would like the speakers and the members of the panel to share their vision on new trends related to sport and investment. So let me start with an open discussion, and the floor is yours. So actually, the first point I would like to raise, and the first question I would like to raise to any of you, is how we make compatible investing in a sport, profitability, financial results, with sport results. Because at the end of the day, I think this is what makes our sector completely unique. And obviously, we know everyone is looking, and the fans are looking for sport results, but we are managers in the sports industry. You guys are experts in investments in sport, so how we make these two completely different worlds compatible?
So, Jeff, everybody, I think when I think about that, winning is what we're all trying to do when we're running a club and investing in sports. But you can create a virtuous cycle, which is what we all try and do. And that is when you win, you generate more revenue, you generate more profitability, you have an opportunity to invest in better players, more infrastructure, and you can accomplish all of these goals. And I think every investment thesis has winning as part of it. The challenge is it's not that simple. You try and win, and a lot of times you invest poorly, or you make bad decisions, or you make good decisions that turn out poorly. And then you can create what's called the vicious cycle, where you now have overinvested, you haven't achieved the results. The only way to get out of it is potentially to invest even more, and you have a spiral, the death spiral, and once you get on that, it's a nightmare. The other factor is that the fans, they don't really want companies or private equity institutions or foreigners to be messing around with their teams unless they see a direct benefit. So we all have to recognize that and be responsible about that. And it's, you know, it's not easy to do, because sometimes you don't live in the city where you own the team, or you're a PE firm from London or New York investing in a club in Austria or Germany or wherever. And it can be a challenge to keep that communication with not just the fans, but the stakeholders, the government, the city, the municipality, all the stakeholders around a sports entity. And I'm talking football, but this applies to all the sports. So I think it's a challenge. I mean, we all have the same dream.
Probably a key question is what is the limit? So to what extent you can invest, or what extent you need to stop investing? But it's not easy, not easy.
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I think investment in sports is actually very difficult. And so it's something that we do with a lot of passion. But effectively, we have to deal with a very emotional ecosystem, you know, with a lot of, you know, fans that, you know, basically they always want to win. You know, they don't care about the cost that you have. They don't care about the debt that the club can incur. And I think the biggest issue that you have when you invest in sports, especially in football, is how you manage cost. And a lot of people talk about revenue, and revenue is very important. But effectively, cost is the central piece. And we have an immense cost base, right, that is very unsustainable at the end of the day. And again, everybody remembers the pandemic, of course, and the pandemic there was no revenue, and the cost base was the same. Because if you contract a player for 5 years, even if this player doesn't play for you one single game or one single minute, you still have to pay him, you know, the full contract. So it's kind of, we need to keep evolving, and I think that's why, you know, new sports like women's football, I think also is so exciting, because you can effectively rebuild a new model. You don't have to follow the same mistakes as men's football did. You can create a more sustainable cost base, you can create new revenue streams, so you can effectively build something new. And other sports are effectively giving us the way, right? If you look at Formula One, like Formula One 10 years ago, nobody was interested, nobody was seeing it. All the teams were losing a lot of money with a few exceptions. And today, all the teams are profitable. All the teams effectively are very valuable. Like, so today, if you want to buy a share on a Formula One team, you have to do a 2.5 billion valuation, so which is a lot of money. But the secret was effectively having a cost control and having effectively a budget cap. And this is what football needs to do once and for all. You know, in order as well that, you know, clubs can be sustainable and investors can effectively do sustainable investments.
I would agree 100% with Luis. We have certainly no revenue problem in football. We have a cost problem. I think that the top players, which earn 20, 30 million a year, they would still play football if they would earn 2 million a year. So you could slash the revenues 90% and football would not die. The problem is when you have 100 revenues and you achieve to increase the 100 revenues to 120, your costs will go from 110 to 130 almost automatically, because the players will say, oh, you made more money, has to come to me, to the agent, to the player, otherwise I go somewhere else. This is the basic problem of this industry, which has a huge difference to all other industries. Let's say if you have a shoe factory or you are a fashion retailer, whatever business in the world, your objective is to make money. If you own a football club, your objective is not to make money. Your objective is to win trophies, to win the league, to win the Champions League. Because if you're the president of a club, no one ever will remember you for, oh, the guy delivered a balanced P&L. You know, no, they will remember you for lifting the trophy, and they will do whatever it costs. So whoever buys a football club has to understand you will not make money along the way. There's no thing like dividends or stuff like this that doesn't exist in football. The only way to make money is the exit. Means you sell for more than you buy. But you will waste a lot of money along the way. And if you run it like break even, you are doing actually a great job.
Yeah, I agree with most of what Jochen said, except the part that you just described men's football. And to Luis's point, I think women's football has an opportunity to break that dynamic. So I'll take it back to something Jeff said on that fundamental root of causality. And you said, I win trophies, therefore I make more revenue, or we win, therefore we make more revenue. What we're trying to do with Mercury, which is unproven, we're trying to prove it out, is that we can actually flip that root of causality. Can we make revenue to then win trophies with that revenue? And that sounds almost paradoxical when you say it in men's, because it's so competitive. The reality is everything we've done at Mercury with our first club is trying to prove that we can lead with incremental revenue streams that then get converted into hopefully good performance on the pitch, chasing this bigger dream of making women's football a sustainable industry that doesn't go through the same path as men's. So it's interesting when we talk about football, because the reality is women's football is a startup, men's football is a very, very mature industry, and some of these dynamics or conclusions that we make don't apply to both. So in the end, I would paint a very optimistic case for the opportunity that women's football has to redefine some of these dogmas that we attribute to the men's side.
I agree with you. I think women's football dynamics are different, probably mainly because of the competitiveness and the intensity of that competition, which drives me to the second question, and start with you, Mario, is what key elements you define in order to evaluate a club? How you make evaluation of the club? What are the key elements in that valuation in women's football, and then we'll transition as well to men's?
Yeah, and I'll answer the question. And a lot of the differences are simply from the fact that it's just so early. Like, it's a seed stage investment.
It's more startup.
You would run and value a process for a startup very differently than how you would value a very mature company. So the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about and diligencing are commercial potential, which especially in women's football, where most of the money is coming from sponsorships, matters more to us than the immediate TV deal that a team may have. So we spend a lot of time thinking, can we build a brand here? Is there something fundamentally appealing about the club that we can work with? Sporting infrastructure, it's huge. A lot of the women's teams today are relying on subsidies or support from men's clubs. So we have a very keen eye to, do we have the core infrastructure that we need to sustain a professional environment? And then the last two pieces are, how attractive is the league? Who are we participating with? I do think that part is universal to any club investment that you make. And last but not least, what market we're going into. So what does the surrounding city location tell us about the potential that the team could have?
Jeff, when you approach a new club potential to be part of your group, what do you look for?
Yeah, so there's a lot to look for. We have a long checklist. My team has looked at easily 50 clubs.
Anyone can help with mics? Let's try.
Okay, I think we're better. And first you have to know what your strategy is. I mean, what are you trying to do? Are you going to do what Johan said, and that is a long-term hold and sell for more than you bought and lose money along the way and hope to recoup it all in the exit? Or are you going to try and figure out how to drive break-even or profitability somehow with the football club? And I think our perspective is we seek to improve the fundamentals, of the marketing side, the business side. We have our head of business here for Leganés, and since he arrived, just applying basic principles that work in other industries and other sports, we've had massive increases in revenue. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, because football clubs haven't necessarily invested in the business side. They invest in the sports side, and they let the other, they let the other things happen sort of organically. They react more than proactive. Leganés has done a ton of things, proactive things on the marketing side, on the sponsorship side, on using the stadium, maximizing revenue. And we have to, because in La Liga, you can only spend as much as you make. So if we want to spend more on players, we have to increase our revenue, and we've been able to do that. But there's another aspect here, which is, does your revenue model include selling players? Because if it does, then you have to be really, really good at identifying young players and developing young players. So when we look at clubs, we look at what their history is of the P&L before player trading. Are they able to get close to break even, or are they do they have big losses? And then what's their history been of player trading? And it's really hard to have a consistent history on player trading because you're just one club. When you're a multi-club organization, you can do a little bit more to balance that out. But if you are, and the difference between, I spent almost 2 decades in baseball, player trading is not a strategy. I mean, you can draft and develop young players and then trade them for other players, or play them in your big league team and then trade them when they become too expensive. But this idea of selling players to other teams is unique to football, and it creates a massive revenue opportunity. You look at teams like Red Bull Salzburg and Brentford and other teams, Nordsjælland, Michelin, teams that have employed that model very successfully, and it does allow you to at least generate some more revenue and potentially profitability along the way while you're waiting for that exit. So I think we look at the fundamentals of how good are they at scouting, how good are they at infrastructure at developing young players, you know, how many young players actually play on the first team. So that whole part of it is a big equation, and then how much opportunity is there on the business side?
Jochen, when a new investment fund comes to you for advice to buy a new club, apart from telling them don't do it, what is your next response to them?
Many times, actually, I tell them not to do it.
Yeah, that's
and even though
that's very smart.
Even though I lose money, saying no. No, it has to make a lot of sense. The first thing you have to make sure is what I said before, that the investor understands the business and the risk, and that he will not make money along the way, and that he will probably lose money along the way and put additional money. But if there is a plan behind, a good plan like one Jeff just outlined here, where you use the money to invest in the infrastructure, not only buying some 35-year-old ex-former strikers, but you really invest, let's say, in the training center, in the stadium, in the actually in your client base, in your database, in your fan engagement. You add value to the club. One day you will sell it for more. You know, that's the only way to make business. If you go with traditional valuation metrics to a club, an investor will never buy it, you know. Again, my example with the shoe factory or any other business, normally you think in multiple of EBITDA. So I pay 10 times the profit, the yearly profit of a company. Doesn't work in sports because no one makes a profit in sports. So you pay 10 times revenues now already, or 8 times revenues, 6 times revenue. It's absolutely crazy. And I think we are right now in a bubble territory, absolutely. I would say a great example is actually women's football, which I believe a lot in. I think this is one of the businesses which will grow tremendously. But some people believed a little bit too much in it, and now we have valuations of 200 million for some WSL or NWSL teams, which makes no sense at all. There's a loss-making teams which have maybe 10 million revenues. So this will burst. Valuations will come down to reasonable levels, and then there is a way to make a good business with it selling later. But right now, I would agree with Gary Cardinale from Redbird recently said we are clearly in bubble territory.
Luis, going back to women's football, what do you think is the limit? What do you think current valuations are? What are the key elements from your perspective on that regard?
Well, I think you need to look at different factors, right? You also need to look at, you know, the audience you are creating, right? Because the interesting thing about women's football is that effectively you can build a new audience, right? You can build a new model. You're not so depending on media rights, right? So as, you know, men's football are, which in a way is also a problem on the starting phase, because you don't have the same kind of guaranteed revenue, so you need to find other ways. But also, you know, effectively, we are talking to probably the most untapped audience that exists, so in sports. And you also have, let's say, enormous opportunity around the brand engagement, right? So, and things like loyalty, which is a massive untapped opportunity in football. So I think in women's football and women's sports, across women's sports, they can effectively work, you know, in a far better way. I think going back to the media, right, which is an important, you know, factor, and then I'll go back to Chelsea and the 200 million, you know, valuation. So I think effectively when you have to create a new model, it's a great opportunity. And if you look at Kings League, if you look at Baller League, you know, which are these new emergent, you know, small-sided football leagues, they effectively created a model where they are distributing media for free, and they are effectively monetizing heavily on commercialization over that media play. And effectively they are using the brand, and they're using a new audience. So effectively it's almost like, you know, the right model that also somebody needs to test in women's, right? Because it's effectively the same angle. And I think if somebody is looking for validation, they need to look at that additional validation from Kings and Baller. So we need to believe on it. I think, of course, we need to be careful not to get into a bubble, because we have still clubs that are very weak. It's still a very weak ecosystem. It's also ecosystem where leagues still are growing, and I think there is some amazing work that, for instance, Liga F has been doing here in Spain, that WSL has been doing in UK. But when you look at the Italian league and you look at the French league and you look at the leagues behind, it's still a massive gap, right? So, and normally the football teams that have a men's team back them up. Until very recently, unfortunately, the men's team was not believing a lot on the women's team, right? It was almost like something that they were forced to do, not necessarily believe in it. So I think now people start to believe in it, but I think we need to be careful not to also now make women's football subsidizing the men's teams, which is effectively what is happening in Chelsea, right? So, but there is, of course, external validation. There is external investors, believing in that valuation. And I think maybe one day the multiple is there. It's definitely not going to be there now on the early stage. But I think it's definitely an ecosystem where if you want now to invest in football, I'll prefer 20,000 times to invest in a league or in a club on women's football than on the men's football. Because you have a bigger multiple and you have a much bigger saying on the construction of a new model.
Thank you. So let's move to the second topic, which you remember is MCOs. So very straightforward question for you, Jeff. There's always the statement that data analytics can create synergies, both on pitch and on the pitch and off the pitch. Is that true? Do you think so?
Well, it's hard to do. I think when you're talking about multi-club, one of the keys is what's going to be centralized and what's going to be out in each of the clubs. And you don't have a ton of opportunity to centralize. I think you can definitely centralize some of your sporting infrastructure. If you have good people in the methodology area, you have good scouts, you have good people in sports science, you can invest in more people in the sporting side that are centralized, that can share their knowledge across multiple clubs. And we do that, and we do that very well. In terms of the analytics, I think that's an opportunity to centralize, because you don't need to have 5 different databases. You can have one database that covers all the players in the world, and all of your teams can look at it. You can build a custom system and for the whole group, and then customize it for each club. So there's definitely opportunities there. If you have any analytic engine or any data analysis proprietary stuff, you can share it across your clubs. I think that's good. On the business side, I think it's harder because each ecosystem is different. Madrid is very different from Cancun. But if you have your functional leaders talking to each other, we do a lot of that. We share best practices in sponsorship and stadium operations and merchandising, et cetera. And that leads to more knowledge among our whole group. We also do it with our coaches. Our coaching staff from Czech Republic came and spent a week here in Leganés working out with our B team here and meeting with our A team. And so you can share some of that as well. So there's definitely some benefits to, if you do it right, the centralizing.
Mario, to the extent that you can share, how you expect to create those synergies in your group with the different clubs?
I was going to add, so first of all, we're an aspiring MCO. So we're hoping to become an NCO this year. We're trying to close the year with 1 additional acquisition, potentially even 2, depending on how the market dynamics play. I don't think there's a single way of doing MCO. And I know the term gets thrown around a lot in the industry, but there isn't a single recipe. And I think every ownership group tackles it in a very different way. The comparison, again, to women's football, the reality is very different. MCO for us, the advantages of it is more in being able to push forward certain functions that today don't even exist at the clubs. So I'm not even at the point of trying to optimize my costs, I'm just trying to justify them. So a perfect example is a tiny independent women's team. It's very hard to fit an entire data team in the P&L today. If I centralize it, I can now provide a data function to multiple teams in the interim of those teams growing enough to be able to afford their own. So there is a part there of just front-loading costs that otherwise would be harder to justify in the early days to accelerate development. The second piece is we're actually trying to prove that there are synergies on the revenue side. And it's easier because we don't have a team in Cancun, and our teams are all hopefully going to be concentrated in a similar area in Europe. But we're trying to prove out that by bundling different assets from teams, we can attract different types of sponsors and access different types of budgets by doing group-wide activations, which is something that some MCOs in the men's teams have done, but I don't think they've leaned into it as much as we're trying to. So those are the two things I would add that I think are very distinctive of our flavor of MCO.
A question for Jochen and Luis, same one, which is, first, do you believe in MCOs? Does it make sense for you? What are the key benefits and what are the key risks in your perspective?
I confess I was very skeptical when this MCO wave started, because just the word synergy is one of the biggest bullshit words in the business world, you know, which one of the buzzwords where normally is very little behind. But if you dig a little bit deeper, there are some groups, I'm not that deep in this like Jeff, for example, but some groups where you clearly can see it even on the pitch, not only the database or joint sponsorship. For me, the best example is Red Bull, which I think makes an absolutely impressive job. It really uses the synergies from their small team in Austria, Liefering, to the bigger team, Salzburg, then to Red Bull Leipzig. We talk about 50 plus players now, which went this way, and then later are sold for 70, 80 million euro to another club. And so yeah, there is synergy. There are advantages. There are also a couple of problems which we have to touch now. We have big regulation problems. You know, you have this, I think it's Article 5 of UEFA competition rules, which says if someone controls or has a decisive influence in two clubs or more clubs, those clubs cannot play in the same competition. And those problems are increasing now. You can see the example Crystal Palace, which is my favorite club in England, so which hurts me a lot, might not be allowed now to play Europa League after winning the FA Cup, because John Textor, who has a decisive influence there, also owns Olympique Lyon, which also will play in the Europa League. So there are big problems there as well.
Well, I first of all, I think the model is a good model, right? So, and the philosophical approach to it is a good approach. Again, I work on the team that set up the first Red Bull multi-club network, and then when Manchester City won, and so there is a lot of theoretical advantages. Now, the problem has always been the execution, right? Because it's not easy. There is, of course, governance barriers. There is, you know, it's not easy to find synergies and common approaches between different clubs, different cultural approaches, different, you know, business models, you know, per club. I'll say that Red Bull is effectively the one that started actually in a very awkward way, because it started, you know, focus more on selling cans than effectively, you know, develop football players. But effectively today is the leading example on how to develop football players, and they keep innovating. I think the new approach that they're having, you know, initially, of course, they're always controlling all the teams. Now they effectively are looking at as well minority participations in some teams. So they did the minority in Leeds, they did the minority in Paris FC, they did as well the minority in Japan. And I think that is a very, very interesting model. You know, Manchester City, you know, was effectively a good model. You know, I think from a commercial point of view was the most successful one. Again, if, you know, in a way it looks like some teams make sense, other teams don't make sense, but it's difficult, right, when you have so many teams trying to make a sense. And I think there is still an opportunity, which is also what Jeff is trying to do, and other, you know, very, very clever team owners, is how you bring, you know, horizontal efficiencies, right? So rather than vertical, horizontal. And I think there is definitely a space for that. You know, there is a way that clubs as well can associate, you know, themselves, you know, on minority positions and minority cross participations. And also, again, I think the governance side is an evolving side. Again, football rules were made less, you know, 2 centuries ago, right? So the famous, you know, football rule book is more than 150 years old. And doesn't mean, you know, that this is right for the modern days. And you need to change it. And you need to change it in women, you need to change it in multi-club network, you need to change, on the refereeing. There's so many things you need to change, and governance needs to adapt to the modern days, right, and the modern world.
Jochen, a very straightforward question as well. What is the ideal exit strategy? Does it make sense for an MCO to start selling different assets? Does it make sense to sell it to a bigger fund? Is IPOs? How you envision that, and what would you recommend again?
Look, there is not one right and one wrong solution. I finally talked with Jeff about it before we came in here. You can do the big exit with the whole group. You can sell parts of it which are in a very good moment. You can add new parts. That's the beauty about the MCO. You're very flexible, and you keep it flexible, a little bit opportunistic as well, and to make a good deal in the right moment.
Mario, what trends do you see in women's investment in clubs? And do you see more investors coming in? Do you see competition getting very tougher? How you see the future in your space?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition coming in, and there's a lot of interest. I don't disagree with the reasons people like Joe can see the symptoms or the signs of a bubble. The reason I'm not ready to call it a bubble is you're essentially buying a call option on the future. And the way that you value a seed stage startup is not by running a DCF or thinking about the future cash flows. It's about thinking about the audience growth opportunity and the possibility that these teams may be worth a lot more in the future than they are today. So there's no metric or traditional metric that you would look at the valuation for Chelsea Women's and say, that's a great deal. Is there a 10% chance that team is worth $2 billion in 5 years? I would argue there is, and I would argue it's more than 10%. And I think that's what's driving a lot of investor interest. It is feeling frothy. There's a lot more investors and a lot higher valuations because of basic supply-demand dynamics. There's only so many clubs. So I think it's a trend that will continue for the foreseeable future. I think we've seen so many other women-dedicated MCOs just like us pop up, and we think it's good for our investments or soon-to-be investments. Of course, also means more competition, which we're preparing for, and that's why we're recapitalizing and making sure we're ready to face those dynamics. But ultimately, in women's football at least, the investments can become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning if a lot of people invest and we raise the standard, then I think we're all going to do wonderfully. If the skepticals win out or the skeptics win out and we are caught halfway through the road, then we may lose a lot of money. So that's also why we're excited to see so much capital being poured into the space, even if it does mean more competition on the pitch.
For you, Luis, and moving aside from MCOs, now talking about the future, what key trends do you see, you envision in investment in sport? Even not talking about only football, but what key trends do you envision for the future in your experience?
Yeah, I think there is maybe 3-4 areas that are very interesting at the moment. So one is, of course, all the sports tech and data, right? So because there is, and the AI as well is bringing, of course, a fully new vision, and interest about that area. I think there's still a lot to do. I think, in a way, sports is the biggest and probably the most unique marketplace anyone can build. We still never look at that as one, right? But again, this needs to be built. I think that's quite an interesting one. I think the media rights space is also interesting, and especially, in this new trend of, effectively, the end of minimum guarantees, and advanced guarantees, and effectively, new models on share revenue, right? So, and again, what the Zone and FIFA are doing, now in US, a lot of people is criticizing, actually think they are doing an incredible job, because it's not just an incredible technology challenge, but it's also a very interesting new model for the future. And I really bet that, the results will be very interesting, for the years to come. I'll say women's sports overall, is incredible, and not just football. Again, you have to look at cycling, basketball, volleyball is happening around, everywhere. And I'll say then the new leagues and this new space or new versions of existing sports or effective new sports. I think there is an incredible potential. We're only seeing now scratching the surface, but I'll say that, in the next years, there'll be multi-billion businesses coming out of that space, and there'll be aggregation. So it's also an area that we are taking a lot of attention at the moment.
I'm cautious about time, so final question for Jeff. How you envision the future of your group to the extent that you want to share? and more extensively on the sports industry from the ownership perspective?
So I feel like we're just at the beginning, even though we've been doing this for 4 years. So I don't like to think about exit strategies. I like to think about my company more as a startup that's growing and is at the very early stages. You know, that being said, I'm fortunate that I don't have a PE fund that's asking me, when are we going to exit? What are our returns going to be? What's the IRR look like? I have individual investors who came alongside with me, and we decided to do this together. And you know, I'm sure some of my investors would like to get out soon at some point with a nice return, and we'll figure out a way to do that. But we're really looking at it for the long term in terms of where the industry's going. And you know, we're looking at really a coming together of sports and entertainment and gaming and betting. And really, I think about my 10-year-old who's home right now, was so excited this morning because Minecraft had a new release, and I don't even know what that means, but it was a big moment for him. And looking at him and how he behaves and what he reacts to, and if that's the next generation of football fans, we got some work to do. I mean, the French league doesn't even have a TV contract for next year, and you know, the TV landscape is changing very, very rapidly, and it's all going to mobile, it's all going to interactive, it's all going to be you know, sort of short attention span, and I don't know where that is. But you know, it worries me, but it also creates a lot of opportunity. So we're constantly thinking about, you know, in Cancun, we have an opportunity because we're on the beach, we're in a resort. We do a lot of fun things. We do a lot of fun things that entertain the fans during the match. You know, they can have a margarita, they can do a zip line, they can get a haircut. You know, there's going to be more and more of that in the future, because to think that someone's just going to sit there and not move and watch football for an hour and a half and then go home. You got to monetize before, you got to monetize at halftime, during, afterwards, and then you can't just let the stadium sit there for 2 weeks until the next match. You've got to figure out a way to monetize the stadium the entire time. So we're doing all of that, and I think that's really the future.
Thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Luis, Jochen, Jeff, and Mario. It's been great to understand your perspective. Actually, I think the fact that having this panel creates great momentum for the industry and shows that investors are very interested in sport. So that means that sports is a true industry, which was not the case, at least in Europe, some years ago. So I think the future is bright. Obviously, there are risks. There are bubble risks, as we have shared. But I think investors' approaching is great news for our industry. So thank you very much.